We seem to be finding the fairy tale juggernaut that is Disney at a bit of an awkward point. Much like a teenager going through puberty, Disney is currently caught between the innocence of childhood and the grim darkness of adulthood, staring into the magic mirror and asking itself, do I cater to the generations of children that made my company what it is today, or do I try and create something catered to the now embittered adults who feel they've outgrown me? However, unlike a teenager, Disney is not really asking this out of wanting to find a sense of their own identity. They're instead asking this question because they really want to know what's going to make me the most money in what is already a crowded summer movie season. And really, it's because of that that I feel Maleficent ended up taking the form that it did, as it's basically made of equal parts of nostalgia, spectacle, and we already lost the Snow White Wars. Warner Brothers is gunning after Peter Pan and Jungle Book, so let's try to sneak this past Godzilla and the X-Men while Marvel's keeping them distracted. I was pretty wary of this film ever since I first saw the announcements, as it was coming on the heels of the aforementioned Snow White films, with Disney's own Order of the Seven being stuck in some sort of development hell. And this was also kind of around the time that I feel people were starting to get kind of burnt out on the dark fairy tales, which is why Disney probably pushed it back a bit. And the trailer didn't really fill me with any much more hope, because it just reminded me of how Disney handled the Chronicles of Narnia franchise, in the sense of, oh, let's make this something big and epic to rival Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings films. On top of that, I'm just not that big of a fan of Angelina Jolie. She has the same problem as Brad Pitt, where she doesn't really disappear into a character. I mean, yeah, she's not the worst choice to play Maleficent, but you don't really see Maleficent. You just see Angelina Jolie with makeup and a costume. As such, my expectations were pretty low going in, and while the film was better than I thought it was going to be, it didn't exactly wow me either. And given that I heard that this film apparently went through reshoots, it really explains a lot of the problems with the film, especially when it comes to its inconsistency with its tone. The first thing that I noticed when I really started watching the film was the poorly produced CGI effects. I mean, it felt like they were equal parts rush job and equal parts 3D pandering. Now, some of the CGI creatures that were more fantastical and not meant to evoke anything real looked alright, but it gets pretty bad when you have the ones that are either supposed to look like a real texture or ones that are supposed to splice in with live-action human footage, because the effects that are supposed to simulate that a person is being carried by this fantastical stuff doesn't have the exact amount of polish needed to lift it out of the uncanny valley. When it comes to the story, the film's best scenes are in the middle, and this is pretty much where Maleficent's already fully grown and kind of in her evil persona, and it's kind of as we're watching Aurora growing up. Those are the scenes that, in my opinion, actually have the best writing and the best character development. When it comes to the beginning, kind of had the feeling of simultaneously moving too slow and too fast, as they're trying to cover a lot of ground, but the pacing of it was just kind of The film just isn't really going anywhere for the first chunk of it that's supposed to start the story. As for the ending, this is where the inconsistent tone is the most apparent, because really, the ending of this film is probably the most rushed and contrived happy ending I have seen since The Legend of Hercules with Kellen Lutz. Not to mention that they're blatantly stealing ideas from Frozen. I mean, it's not like you're literally seeing characters from Frozen, but a lot of the key things that made Frozen somewhat unique compared to the other animated films, they literally transplant into this film. I mean, those of you who've seen the film probably know exactly what I'm talking about, but really, that's just sad. And if that was one of the scenes that they were doing the reshoots for, that just makes it even sadder. What also bothered me was that for a film that's trying to be so consistent with the animated film from the 50s, you think they would get the names right for some of the key characters. I mean, they get it right for the most part with Maleficent, Aurora, Stefan, and Philip, but then they screw up the names of the three fairies that raise Aurora, and I just don't see why they would change the name. I know it's a minor nitpick, but personally, Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather sound a hell of a lot better than Flittle, Knotgrass, and Thistlewood. I actually had to write it down because I couldn't really remember the names, but really, if you're going to try to match up with the film from the 50s and try to actually connect the characters, why would you screw that up? And it's not like, oh, they're just minor, unimportant characters. No, they are major characters in the story. And if you're trying to kind of even have it be Sleeping Beauty from Maleficent's point of view, you kind of want to keep that detail consistent if you're trying to bank on the nostalgia of the movie. That aside, what it really comes down to is the fact that we've pretty much got three stories almost kind of stitched together and crammed into one. Kind of like they didn't know what story they were really trying to tell. If they wanted to do an origin story, they really should have just gone the Wicked route. Just have the film be only focused on the origin, be only focused on what's leading up to the events that we know about, and have the final scene be the first scene from the original Sleeping Beauty where Maleficent is placing the curse on Aurora, and have the film kind of trail off there, almost Crisis Core style, if that was the approach they wanted to take. Because that's kind of what Wicked does, where it doesn't try to tell the story of the Wizard of Oz from the Wicked Witch's point of view, it pretty much just tells the origin story and lets the origin story take up most of it, and then allude to what it then leads into. And that would have been an approach if they were wanting to do this as an actual origin story for Maleficent. If they wanted to present this as like an alternate history or a what really sort of happened, kind of like Jack the Giant Slayer, they really should have embraced that instead of trying to so heavily connect it to the story as it was told by Disney back in the 50s. I mean, heck, with the way they designed both the Kingdom of Men and the Kingdom of Fairies, they could have even gone with the whole man versus nature aesthetic that we saw in something like Fern Gully. Now, if they really wanted this to be the story of Sleeping Beauty from the villain's perspective, then they really needed to kind of make this more of a tragic story instead of having the crappy, rushed, happy ending. I mean, it even would work better with the voiceover, because the voiceover, they said, oh, there were these two kingdoms, and only a hero or a common enemy would unite them. And they wasted that potential because Maleficent could have been that common enemy. I mean, I understand, yeah, she's like the protector of the fairies, could be leading the fairies, but really, what could have happened, they could have still had the tragic elements, but they could have gone almost the Code Geass route, where even the fairies would almost turn on Maleficent, thus prompting why they would help Philip and all that and make all of that be the case of, even though Maleficent is a tragic figure, because of her being a malevolent force of destruction that is basically going to wreck everything, that's what would bring both sides together to stop the common foe. And thus it would have made the scenes of her watching Aurora grow up and her kind of the emotional journey that Maleficent takes would have made that a hell of a lot more powerful. At the end of it all, it really just felt like they just didn't really know what they wanted to do with the concept. They just figured, oh, we'll just make a film called Maleficent about the villain from Sleeping Beauty, but it just felt like they didn't really develop it much further. And that would even explain the need for the reshoots, as it would probably either emerge as an attempt to salvage a broken film, or just being the result of executive meddling. While the film isn't terrible, it could have been a lot better. I mean, the idea, the potential is there. It's just they needed to focus the story a little bit. And if they wanted to have kind of this multifaceted fantasy, then they should have just taken the resources and produced it as a mini-series similar to the Merlin miniseries from 1998, if they really wanted to kind of add these layers to the story of Maleficent. If you're a fan of Disney and want to see this reimagined fairy tale, don't pay full price for it. At the most, pay $5, $6 for a ticket. As for whether or not this is a good film for kids, well, I'd say youngest that could probably watch it and understand it would probably be 7, 8 years old. I mean, the best gauge would be if they're able to watch a Harry Potter film like Sorcerer's Stone or Goblet of Fire and be able to follow what's going on, then they'll probably be able to follow this film without too much trouble. But that's pretty much it. Don't pay full price for it. See it at a matinee if you want to see it while it's in the main theaters, or wait for it to come to the dollar theater because it's not worth paying full price for. That said, I give Maleficent a 3 out of 5. So that's it for this episode of Romney's Reviews. Tune in next time for my review of Edge of Tomorrow. See you then.